Hi, everyone. This is Simeon from Elevate.Strategy. Hope you guys are doing well. It's another Friday here. I'm here in Toronto, Canada, as you guys might know. I'm glad you can make it to another Leadership Live interview today. And as always, I have great guests. And today is a guest who's near and dear to my heart personally, because I worked with him at one of the consulting firms that I was at, and he was instrumental for me to learn a lot about different things. So I'll introduce him in a second, but just a very quick update on some things happening at Elevate. Had some really great successes over the past week. Received news from one of my old clients, and I posted it earlier today. She was also my first guest, coincidentally, from Leadership Live, but I worked with her, Denise, a while back, and really tried to hone in on what I always talk about: value proposition, right? So we talk about value proposition in our businesses for products and services, but we never talk about that for ourselves. So hearing her story was awesome. So if you haven't seen that, go back to in 9 or 10 interviews ago, and you'll see. Yeah, great news. So she landed several opportunities and decided to go with one of them, and so. Highly competitive offer. I'm so happy for her. So that's one piece of good news this week. So I'm just gonna, without further ado, I'm gonna introduce our guest today, and then I'll talk about why he's particularly special in my life in a second. So today we have David Sinclair, and David is a procurement executive with broad experience covering all aspects of sourcing and procurement across a wide range of sectors. And when I was at that firm that I was working with him, we still happen to be in public sector, so that was great there. But he's also worked in communications, media, and high tech, etc. And he's a global expert in his field, and he's helped clients across different countries and continents: UK, Europe, South Africa, North America, and Canada, obviously, where I met him. And his passion is really in the pursuit of client value and developing and encouraging talent. And so encouraging talent is something that's very rare, but David is someone who really invests his time and energy into people as he believes in. So I'm just going to bring him to front stage and welcome him. Hey, David, how are you?
Good afternoon, Simeon, and thank you for such a wonderful introduction.
No problem, no problem. You make it easy for me, David. Thank you. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. I'm excited for this conversation. I've actually never heard your story before. To the listeners who are watching this now or rebroadcast, again, I always encourage folks that are watching the rebroadcast to reach out to my interview guests, because they're always accessible, because they're my friends. So, but yeah, David, you're instrumental in my life, because in the firm that we were working at, there was a lot of advice that you provided to me as an informal mentor that really helped me to make decisions. That some of them were really big decisions. So I don't know if you know that, but maybe introduce yourself to the audience and what it is that you do today. And by the way, congratulations on the new role, and maybe you can talk about that too as well.
Certainly. So thank you for that, Simeon, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everybody else. So firstly, I've literally in the last week changed jobs. Up until then, for the last 3 years, I was an associate partner with EY Consulting, based in the UK. It was a fantastic organization, had a great time, worked with some wonderful people and wonderful clients. My focus was on commercial and procurement transformation. To put that in simple terms, basically helping organizations manage the money they spend, better engage internally, improve the use of systems, and also just generally work better together as individuals and as organizations. And we did that across public and private sector and on various exciting projects. One of which I was extremely proud to be part of was related to COVID-19. About a year ago, I was instrumental with a core number of colleagues in setting up a field hospital in the north of England.
Wow.
It's what they called here the Nightingale hospitals, as after the nurse was Nightingale. Yeah. So that was a unique and amazing experience, something which I was honoured to be part of, and I such an amazing experience to be involved in that, and also to be involved in something that actually helped and delivered, comfort and care to patients it wasn't hugely utilized, but at a good point in time on a daily basis, we had up to 200 odd patients in any given time. Sure. In the wards, and I worked with some amazing people in health, in the military, in emergency services, in nursing. It was a very humbling experience, Simeon, and I'm a better person for having the honour and privilege to be part of that wider team.
Wow. And in Canada, we, as I'm sure across the world, we heard a lot of stories about the UK and Europe in general, and what all what COVID, the situations that were taking place, many of which actually kind of happened before they even came to North America. So I'm glad you had an opportunity to do that. And I think, it's funny that well, it's not funny, but COVID has really impacted everybody as far as, people who are working, who are looking for employment, who are transitioning, who are graduating. And I think it's really caused people to reflect a lot more on purpose and kind of identity, and all the questions around, have what I've been doing in my career, has it made a difference to the world, and something that leaves behind a better place, right, per se. And I'm really glad that you had that opportunity to set those things up. Hopefully there won't be a need for them, right, moving forward. So, but that's great. So tell us a little bit about your new role, because when I first advertised you as a guest, I think you were still in the old role, perhaps, I'm not sure, but then you got transitioned over, being a successful person as you are. But tell us a little bit what you do now. Is there anything kind of different that you used to lead?
The role is different in terms of the scope and the scale. My focus is on Europe, Middle East, and Africa, as opposed to global or the UK. Okay. And it's on what we call source to pay, which is the end-to-end process by which you buy through to you pay. So where I think it's different from a number of other organisations I've been in is that the capabilities we have are end-to-end. They're much more integrated, and they're much more holistic. So there's an opportunity here to be much more inclusive in terms of how you approach and address issues, and having a higher level of compliance and providing a more effective end solution for clients. And rather than traditionally in a lot of consultancy engagements where you implement a solution, you do an analysis, you do a piece of work, and then you withdraw, and then over time it unravels or it doesn't endure. Here, there's opportunity to provide end-to-end integrated services, right, which I found quite appealing. And also some of the innovative technology and innovations I think that they are bringing forth to market, I think are what the market needs. I see the gaps, and that resonated strongly with me. Plus, there's a few colleagues who from previous lives who I spoke to as well, who've been there for a number of years. So when you triangulate these 3 points, that's what brought me to this new role. So I'm very excited to be at Genpact. I think they're an organisation whose profile and their sort of perception is in transition. I think they've got a lot of great capabilities and scale they can bring to bear. And right. I think the next few years are going to be very interesting.
Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think everything is evolving very quickly. Working with clients, like I've been here at Elevate building as a practice now for about 2 years, and the world was very different 2 years ago versus a year ago versus now, right? And so that's affected everything about business. And I've spoken with folks all the way from, digital transformation experts to risk and insurance, and everything that's ever happened in the past now, it's almost being reinvented. So as you kind of oversee these new territories, I'm pretty sure that you're going to see some pretty awesome things and make an awesome difference. So, and for those of you who are watching right now, if you've got any questions at all about what David does, and if you're particularly interested in what he does, feel free to comment, and we'll pull you into the conversation. But so David, about this series, Leadership Live. I was explaining to you, and it's really more about sort of the career journey and stories of people than they are not so much technical aspects of things, right? So I'm going to ask you to share with us the journey that you took from, maybe not so far back as when you were born, but at least at some point, maybe between then and now. How did you get to where you are today, and kind of what were the key milestones?
It's an interesting journey. I probably will point to a few things in the past, Simeon. So I came from very humble beginnings. I came from a family which was a very challenging environment for a number of reasons. So for a number of years, as a kid, I was homeless, and for a number of years, we were basically in poverty and not in a good place. I also grew up in a part of the world where, coming from um, biracial a multi-ethnic family, that wasn't so. There wasn't such a forgiving or accommodating environment as well. So it was quite a difficult environment to grow up in. So you had to sort of just go with the flow and take knocks. So childhood was an interesting experience, but one thing it equipped me for was I was in a contradictory way. Despite everything I just said, I also mixed with kids from a broad spectrum of society, from middle class, upper middle class, down to working class and below. So I had quite a large spectrum of interactions. And if I was going to fast forward a few years, I remember I lost touch with a number of kids that I used to know when I was in my elementary school years. When I was in high school, I met some of them again. And I asked them what they were going to do with their lives and where they were going to go and what they were going to do. And they were all pretty much going on to higher education. And that never struck me as something I wanted to do or thought I could do. But then I realized I didn't really know what I wanted to do in life. And that going to higher education would give me an opportunity to figure things out a bit and to see what other opportunities or things that were out there that I could do. So without a lot of preparation, I crashed into a number of exams and passed them and got myself eligible for university. And it was a strange experience because the school I went to wouldn't let me pass the exams. The teacher said, no, you won't pass them.
Okay.
So I went to college in the evenings.
Okay.
And when I went to college in the evenings, I had the blessing of, I still remember him to this day, a teacher called Mr. Lang. And he spoke with passion, with insight, and he brought the subject to life. And the class was full of adults, and everybody there wanted to learn. And when you're in that environment, it's different. And I brought myself up in that environment to the standard of the class, and that was very, very pivotal, because I saw that if you have an impassioned teacher and someone who can express something with conviction, joy, and love, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. No, it certainly does. David, I had no idea. I had no idea about any of that.
It's not something I publicise, and to be honest, it was only going to Canada and having a chance to look back that I found it more possible to talk about these things. In the past, I wouldn't have talked about them at all. I would have just kept them down or suppressed them. But now at this stage, I feel I can discuss it to an extent, but more so than I was able to do before. Because I think there's a lot of assumptions. People think that you are, of who you are. A lot of people might think, oh, he's never had the struggle that I've had. He's got quite a good life. He's got this, that. But I've experienced everything from blatant racism to poverty to social exclusion, all unvarnished and undiluted. And so I learned a lot from it. I try not to carry any chip on my shoulder or any negativity because it's a long time ago. But but it was these things were quite informative. So as I went through life, I honestly didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went to university, which was more by chance and design. And when I came out, I still wasn't clear what I wanted to do. And bizarrely, someone who was not very athletic and not very in sports or anything, I ended up in the military, and I ended up as an officer in what we call the parachute regiment, Army Airborne, Canadians have an equivalent to it, Americans at the Airborne Rangers. So I ended up in that organisation as an officer, and once again, I don't think I was the best officer in the world. I don't think I was great at a lot of things. But what I did have was I had the affection and the loyalty of the men who have served with me. They would do anything for me and I would do anything for them.
Right.
And I learned a lot again from some very experienced individuals. And what they taught me wasn't tactics. It was about life, things in life. There were things they say to me that I remember one sergeant major, his nickname was Matt French, and I was giving a lecture to a whole bunch of soldiers and talking about tactics, technical stuff. And he said to me afterwards, he said, just come over here. He goes, what do you think these men are thinking when you're talking to them? And I said, honestly, I don't really know. I don't know what they're thinking. He goes, I'll tell you what they're thinking. They're looking at you and thinking, is he a man I can trust? Will he do the right thing, or is he going to get us all killed? Has he got the courage and convictions to do the right thing? And is he somebody I can come to with my problems or issues and he'll talk to me properly, or will he just be, completely difficult? And when I heard that, it was like a revelation. It was like something I never heard. It was like, you don't get that in books, you don't get that in videos, you don't get that in any manual. It's the insight and experiences. And so I met a number of very experienced individuals who've been around the world and done everything. And I found them very profound, very insightful about the human character, about individuals, about what motivates and demotivates individuals. And I found a lot of what they taught and shared with me, and a lot of experiences they imparted to me, have carried forward in my life since then.
Right.
So I got the age about 25, and I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then I ended up sort of falling into procurement business. And that was really through one of the firms that we work for. Were they used to have an executive recruitment arm, and they recruited me into an organisation of financial services. But as a consequence of that, I was so impressed by them, I ultimately joined them in London. So I joined the firm you and I worked at in London the first time.
Gotcha.
Many years ago, as a junior consultant. I then, for some bizarre reason, although I was based in London, I was then sent to travel, and it was in the days when travel to clients was as a given. I then ended up working in New York, downtown New York, with a US team on a very, very difficult client assignment, probably one of the most challenging ones. And the issue was compounded by the fact that the program leader was an extremely difficult individual, extremely emotional, very. These days, you would say that they had issues or challenges and would probably have been taken off the role. And you have to ask yourself a number of questions. Was the individual's behaviour like that because of pressure from above, or was it just simply that that's the way the individual was? But we hit a number of issues, and we hit a number of ethical and moral issues, because in essence, what we were being asked to do was confirm that the sort of total number of savings that were estimated was true and accurate and a fair reflection of what was assessed.
Right.
And report that back to the client senior management. But what became very clear to me in the analysis we did was there was a major gap, and that what was previously articulated as a certainty was not a certainty, and there was a gap. And no matter how we try and stretch the scale of probability, no matter how you do it, no matter how many caveats, you just ain't going to fill that gap, and that gap is going to be the way it is. So you have to bring that to the client's attention. You have to come clean and say, this just isn't going to work. We're not going to be able to do this. There's a gap, there's a shortfall. The previous analysis of something wasn't right.
Yeah.
So let's just say I ended up in a difficult situation where the project lead didn't want that shared or open.
Right.
And that put me in a very difficult ethical situation at that time.
Could I go back just a little bit to the childhood aspect, but then more of the, you mentioned loyalty and you mentioned trust, right? And now that you talk about your story, I kind of understand a little bit more about when I was working with you, the qualities that you exemplified to the teams that I worked with, and also what you would say to me, right? Which is, and the reason why I go back to this is because I think there's a theme around your value system, which is integrity. And, integrity is something that is a combination of doing what you say, showing up when you say you're going to do that, being an example. The example that you gave about, being, what do you think these soldiers are thinking? It's really literally, can I trust this guy with my life, right? How has that sort of shaped your leadership style then? And sort of, give me an example of where maybe there's a struggle there to be trustworthy or something like that. Like, how does that relate to how you've become as a person and also as a business leader? The loyalty and integrity aspect.
I think my loyalty is always to the maintenance of a team and the team welfare, and I always have a soft spot for the junior team members because a lot of pressure and challenges is put on them, and they don't have experience to draw on,
right,
or to go for it. So I remember what it was like to be in that position. So I'd probably say that I'm much more effective at managing teams than I am at upward management, and shall we say, making myself look good to senior levels. That's never been something that's really been in my sweet spot, and something probably, if I was much more career calculating, I would have probably spent more time and effort on. But to me, meeting your commitments and maintaining the welfare of a team have been two things which I've always been very important to me in a number of different environments. I've been on client projects where that issue has been the challenge. I've been on one where in South Africa where the client physically manhandled one of the female staff, and I basically had to tell their senior client that the whole team's leaving unless you address this issue. And this was before the whole Me Too and before the recent, shall we say, an awareness. This was about between 2006 2008, where I don't think these things were dealt with the same level of rigor.
Right.
So there was a number of issues where they landed on me, and this happens a lot. There's if I just digress slightly, there's a famous book by an American called Philip Caputo. Philip Caputo's wrote a great book called A Rumor of War, which highlights his experiences as a Marine platoon leader in Vietnam in the early stages of the US war in 65 to 66. And then at the end of the war in 75, he was a journalist. But there's a point where in his book where he says, there's always a point in leadership where the coldness and the frost of being in isolation hits you, where everybody's looking at you, and the same expression saying, well, what are you going to do now? And that does come, you, whether you like it or not, issues come up, ethical issues, conflicting issues, and you have to deal with them, and you have to be willing to address them. I've had that issue as one example in Johannesburg. I had another issue in Toronto in one of the firms we worked with, where someone, a very senior partner, made a very derogatory, racist comment. He thought it was a joke about another colleague in front of me.
Right.
And I spoke to the person he made it about and said, I found that unacceptable. But the other person was going for a promotional process and didn't want to cause any upset.
Right.
But
Right.
I agonized and angst about it all evening because I couldn't live with myself. Because I heard it, it was something I couldn't unhear. So the next day I went into the senior partner's office and I literally just made it clear to him that it was totally unacceptable and out of order, and that anything like that again would require me to go to HR and take this through formal process. As even though we were friends and colleagues, and my being in the firm was in many cases instigated by him. But the problem was, loyalties aside, I couldn't unhear what I heard. And the challenge in leadership is when issues like that come to you, do you do the right thing or do you reach some sort of accommodation? And if you reach some sort of accommodation, can you then live with yourself and the consequences?
Right. Yeah. You know, and I think that from my years in corporate, you know, there's a couple of things, right? There are leaders who don't even think or say the right thing at all. I mean, it's entirely about the development of their career. By the way, you mentioned earlier, had you spent more time working on your career, things might have been different. I'm very glad that you didn't, because you're an exceptional leader the way that you are. But it's just going back to, there are leaders who don't even think in that realm and don't really kind of consider that. Then there are leaders who kind of will talk, right? We'll talk about it kind of, you know, and it's the town hall effect, right? You kind of, in the public sphere, that's what you say. But then there's the leader who talks it and walks it as well, right? Someone who is willing to step up to the plate and, at the risk of maybe something that they would benefit from, to do the right thing, like you said.
I think I think the world has moved. In my last role, in particular, I led the learning and development and capability team in EY, and I spent in my last two roles. The world's changed. I think if I go back and look at myself and how I used to work, when we used to work together or before, I would say I was probably more directive and much more, this is what we need to do. We need to do it this way. Let's all go and do it.
Right.
Now I spend a lot more time in development, coaching, counselling, and much more when mistakes are made and issues are raised. So to me, it's about working these things through together. And you have to embed. I think if you want to work in business and be successful now, if you want to have a leadership role, I truly believe that in doing so now and going forward, you have to be willingly and consciously wanting to mentor, coach, and engage all the time, and do it wholeheartedly, not in a grudging, really don't want to do this, want to just get the sale, want to get it done, want to tell everyone how wonderful. You have to do it. I'll tell you a story. This was a call I was on yesterday in my new place, and the person I was speaking to is not a few hundred miles south of you, south of the border. And I knew this person from Calgary when we worked together in Calgary a number of years ago. Now this person is now a peer level with me. But here's how the conversation started. David, I remember when we worked together and I was very junior, and you were one of the only senior people who treated me with courtesy and respect and made me feel welcome, and didn't throw me under the bus and didn't just pile on me. I never forgot that, and I'm so glad we're working together. Right. And that was a conversation, I hadn't spoken to this person for probably 15 years now. And that's a conversation we had 2 days ago.
Wow. Yeah, that's special, right? That's
meant a lot.
special. Yeah. And I
But
don't think there's any accolades from a sort of a success money title perspective that can buy that kind of impact that you have in somebody's life, right? But I can tell you that I totally reverberate with that friend of yours. I mean, you know, there was one event I remember, and without going into too many incriminating details, but I remember there's one event where no one else was mentioning anything to me, but you took me in from the hallway and you pulled me into an office and you closed the door and you said, Simeon, I got to tell you something, and you need to take action on this, you said. And and that was like, I don't know if you remember that, but that was life changing for me, because I realized that what I was trying to do was not working. And you know
I remember it well, Simeon, and I have to say I really struggled with, before saying it to you, I have these conversations with myself, and I felt really bad afterwards. But
really
I felt like I'd shocked you, or you know, it's, things like this are not easy to convey,
of
because
course not. Yeah,
because we all want, at some level, we all want to belong, and we all want to feel valued, and we all want to feel that we fit. We all do. No, I can't, unless you're truly immoral and don't have any,
right, sure.
unless you're a complete loner and don't have any connectivity. So it wasn't something I took any joy or pleasure in, but I felt I had an obligation to you as an
Right.
individual and as a decent human being that you are, and someone who's got, in my eyes, having seen who you are, you're someone who's got great wisdom. You're a very wise individual. You have great insight,
Don't think
great
so.
experience, and you
Don't think
have a very thoughtful way
right.
of working. And so for me, you've got great qualities. It's just not every organization can see the value, the benefit. And sometimes it's a case of finding the right fit means having to move.
Right. Yeah. And that was actually one of the key moments in my career where I realized, and that was probably 17 years into my career now, where I realized that that was indeed the case, and that sometimes things may not work out no matter how hard you try to push through them. Actually, last year I gave a TED talk on that, and the
I
TED
heard
talk
it.
was all about kind of how failure drives you to understand your passion and actually what it is that you really love to do, right? And that for me, when you walked me into the room and you said, hey, listen, it's not working out, I'm not doing anything to your position right now, but I just want to give you a heads up, made me realize that what I had been trying really hard to do just wasn't working, and I was just banging my head against the wall. And for me, it was a turning point to start thinking about maybe some things that I was good at and trying to kind of develop a career out of that. And that's something that has been invaluable for my coaching life. When I speak with clients, David, the easy route to take is to, despite how hard it is to find a job, right? Sometimes the easiest route to take is to look for that next role to do more of what you're doing today that pays you more and gives you a bigger title, right? It makes sense. You're comfortable with that. But the easy route is not often the route that is the most fulfilling, right? And the people who realize and understand their passion and start to make the risks perhaps that are needed to kind of pursue that, actually that's not the easy route at all. But that takes that introspection that I think you bring to the table that really allows for that kind of thinking. So anyway, going back to your story, so the loyalty aspect, trust aspect, integrity aspect, I sense there's a theme here about how you view not just business, but about life, right? And that's loyalty. So tell me something about, question I always have at the end of these interviews is, what career advice would you give? But something about loyalty. What would you say to people now who are working, maybe going up the ranks, or maybe at the C-suite level, right? Why is loyalty important, and how do people start working on that?
I think there's a number of reasons why it's important. I think just generally in the universe, you should give unconditionally. And if you have an if you have an opportunity to help build, support, counsel, mentor, then it's the right thing to do. I think we have a obligation or duty, whatever you want to call it, and this is a personal view. I don't believe everyone should carry the same view or opinion, but we have a duty in the universe to put back or to give. And if you had any modicum of success, or you've had any opportunity, then I think even more so, there's an obligation on you, I think, with a small role to give back. So I think, to me, to anybody at leadership, no matter how senior you get, I would say be willing to give unconditionally, and that is without looking for anything in return. Be willing to put yourself out there in terms of showing people. I had in our last place, a very senior partner said to me, I made a joke about myself, and it was a self-deprecating joke. And this fellow, who you'll know who I mean, he was a very senior, he was managing partner. He said, David, I worked with a colleague, and my colleague would never say anything to belittle himself. He would only talk about himself in strong ways and definitive ways, and never make a joke. Now, part of that's British humour. British humour is to send yourself up. So part of the reason why we do it is because in British humour, you don't like people who are too overconfident or arrogant.
Right.
But I said to this fellow, I said, that's interesting. Your colleague must be the most infinitesimal, boring person in the planet.
It's true.
Unbearably so. So I think have a degree of humility. I think humility is an underrated and understated virtue. The greatest heroes, the people I admire, people like Bruce Lee, or there's an interesting individual I've been reading about recently, a fellow called Tu Lam, who was a refugee from Vietnam, ended up in American Special Forces, ended up in Delta Force, and now is becoming a bit of a media sensation. But he's a very humble guy, and he's very, very impressive intellectually, physically, in every way. He's very impressive. But the common recurring theme when I listen to these individuals is humility. Have humility to put yourself out there, to provide some assistance, help other people on the journey, because it is a journey and the journey comes to an end. So the least we can do is help other people. So so no matter how senior you get, stay humble, be willing to learn, and be able to make a joke about yourself.
Right. And, I think that's kind of disarming, and it allows for other people on the team to show humanity as well, right? People will take the example of their leader, and they'll start to mimic the behaviors of their leader, right? So if you are showing yourself to be, first of all, I've always believed that if you're really good at something, it'll show, right? You show yourself in your work. That's simply it. There is a time and place to kind of, speak about your qualifications, because you might need to, especially in the field of professional services, right? But I think that humanity of strength in weakness or strength in humility is something that is unique. And I think that's something that's very, very important, that to show that, like you said, I mean, if we're sort of the bragging part of everything about us, we must be the most boring person in the world. I mean, I just think about your story now, right? And this is not at all by any means bragging. It's something about sharing your life. And some parts of it, as you said before you went to Canada, is very difficult to talk about, right? But and your life, therefore, is not boring at all. It's very clear.
Canada gave me the opportunity for some detachment and objectivity. There's something else I just wanted to raise. If I look back over the last year and COVID, when I speak to a lot of peers, they've had a pretty good time out of COVID. They've been at home a lot more. They've been with families. They have houses with gardens. When I speak to a lot of the junior team, they've been in very small accommodation, shared accommodation, no space, no green grass or fields or places to go, trapped in difficult circumstances, and been very difficult for them. So one of the things I think is, to understand and try and put yourself in other people's shoes, and not at peer level, but at all levels, to see because I think that to me, there was I was on a senior management call about opening up the offices, and my point was, yes, we had to open them up, and everybody else said, no, they wouldn't come in. I said, well, you're looking at it from your perspective. You're not looking at it from the perspective of the junior consultants and those who are living in very difficult circumstances, either with extended family, in shared accommodation, next to antisocial neighbours, etc. They need a break or a place they can go to get out of it all in those conditions. So I was successful in getting that message through, and that made me very happy, because it showed that there was a broader level of inclusiveness required.
Right.
And so
for sure.
There's a lot of parody about wokeism, Me Too, and things. But I think, as with everything in life, you go from one extreme to another. When I started in industry or business, sexism and racism was apparent and visible and very raw and very undiluted, and things that were said then could never be tolerated now. So things have improved to an extent, but in my journey, I've seen how hard it is for women, especially if they've had children, to come back into the working environment. So very, very difficult, and most organisations, no matter what they say, still don't do enough to accommodate that. A lot of people think when mothers go on maternity leave, they're having a holiday. They're having nothing of the sort, or they're having a fun time. The majority are not at all, and the transition. And I had this conversation with one just a couple of days ago. When you transition back into work, you're emotionally very vulnerable, you're fragile, you've got guilt because you're leaving your child. There's all these things, and then you're meant to just come back in to your job and just carry on as nothing had happened.
Right.
Well, I've had those, and that was when I was in Toronto. I saw this in front of my eyes, and it made me rethink about the role, the gender balance, equanimity, the burden that's carried by mothers at all levels. So I think I'm a different person now to probably even the person you worked with, Simeon. Some people say I'm either mellowed or I'm much more forgiving, but I'm not. I just think with the generations that people are working with, just telling something's wrong isn't good enough. You have to work how it's wrong, what they can do about it, and the reasons why, and you have to invest that time. And you have to be willing to admit when you're not right as well, and have more time and discuss how we get to things or get through things in a more collective manner. That's the way I think things are these days. So I really believe that these are positive trends. I also think COVID has highlighted the tyranny of commuting. Commuting is a very, very, very stressful.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I think there's been a lot of premature philosophizing and grand statements in the business press about the impact of COVID on the working environment. Let's look at where we are 6 months or a year's time and see what has been retained and what has gone back to the way it was before. Right. I think the jury's still out, but I think if we can do anything to reduce commuting and reduce the stress on families and people to get into an office, we should do so.
Right. Yeah. Let me ask you a question for yourself in looking for role models in your life, right, that show these qualities. Has it been difficult for you throughout your journey as a professional to find people like that who are willing to invest in you, willing to show humility, and then for those who are listening, who are trying to look for people who are real, right? Let's get real. How do we look for people now? What qualities and traits should someone look? And I'm saying upwards now, right? Someone who can share that example. So has it been difficult for you? And then secondly, what advice would you give to someone who's looking for that kind of leadership?
So it has been difficult for me. I think in my experience, at points, some of these individuals have come to me or become known to me and made themselves apparent to me, not by declaring it, but just through insight and experience of working with them or through circumstances and events, bringing that out. So it's not been by design, and I haven't had the opportunity to go find people. It's just been circumstance or opportunity that's brought individuals out. But I've been in environments where none of that's happened, and I've been the last one standing. And recently, that I was in an environment where I had no mentors or anybody in support, and it was quite a lonely place to be in.
Right.
My advice to anybody, or my suggestion to anybody, is it's a two-way street here. If you're looking for that, you have to be open for it as well, and you sometimes have to take a risk or take a shot with somebody. And it may not be what you want it to be, but then again, it may. But you have to take a risk and open yourself up. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Right. And I would say even make yourself available, right, for that to happen.
Yeah, and most of us know when someone's genuine or not. Most of us, our instincts are pretty good. You can tell if someone's sincere or genuine or not.
Right. Yeah, I would almost think that this kind of an approach and investment is you really have to have the maturity of someone looking at the long play, right? What kind of a person do you want to be at the end of the day? Meaning when your life is near towards the end, right? It's a long play versus the short play of, what immediate role do I want to have? What immediate income do I have? As much as important it is for compensation, obviously it's very, very important. But absolutely having that sort of little visual, what kind of person you want to become. So, go ahead.
We've all got to pay the bills, and look, all of us, including myself, I've not always made the right career choices in life. Sometimes I've done exactly as you said. I've gone for a role like the last role because I either had the bills to pay or I was chasing the commercials rather than doing the job that was right for me. So my life has not been a perfect set of decisions. I made a lot of wrong decisions, impulsive decisions, emotional, based decisions based on things which were not as you've outlined, Simeon, but over the longer term, your points stand and your points still resonate. And I would say over the mid to longer term, the more decisions you make, which are based on doing the right thing for you and doing the thing that plays best to your strengths, plays best to true you, the more you'll be able to live with yourself and the more you'll have a contented life.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Well, like I said, you're one of the first people that came to mind when I set up the series. You've given me so much more than I expected as far as your background, but also things to think about. And I can hardly imagine how much more detail there is behind that you have, that's in your memory, but that has shaped you into kind of the person that you are and the values that you have. And my hope is that, well, for the listeners who will come back to the rebroadcast, that if you have questions about these sorts of issues, feel free to reach out to David. We don't talk enough about these sorts of things in the workplace, right? We sort of pay lip service to it sometimes. And the reality is that, I can tell you just a very quick kind of accounts, right? So a lot of my clients, I have the initial half an hour call, right, to introduce myself, etc. It's customary for that, and then to get to know them, etc. But I can tell you that most of the time, it's a half hour call. 15 minutes of that up front is really just talking about themselves, right? It's like, and then I came out of this Ivy League school, and then I went up the ranks, and I was in banking, but the best of the best, and now here I am. And then so inevitably, it kind of builds up like this, and the excitement is there, and then so you get to the top, you're like, okay, so why are we talking now? So it's been great. It's been a great ride. And that's when the guard comes down, because I start saying to them that, there's something that's missing here, right? It may not be very profound. It might just be something that, a skill that you need to adjust, but you don't have to tell me about everything that you've done in order for me to believe that you're a great person or that you're a great worker. I just simply want to know how you're doing and how can I help you, right? And you don't need to, but that's just kind of the way that we're raised, right? And especially in the corporate world, is to kind of, if we don't speak up, we're automatically seen as being weak.
right? So that's
Yeah.
the midpoint of that conversation is always so interesting, because there's always that aha moment where they're like, all right, you're talking about value, you're talking about passion, you're talking about impact, you're talking about legacy. Okay, well, let's just switch gears now. Here's why I'm talking to you, right? So yeah, I recognize. So you're going to say something? I cut you off there.
No, you didn't. Your wisdom once again is coming out in quantities. I think it's also I find this in North America that people have to display their credentials in a more vigorous way,
Right.
and much more so than I would say they do in the UK or parts of Europe or else. It's not culturally. If you big up yourself in that respect, that people usually sit back and recoil. You're meant to be a bit more self-deprecating. It has its plus points and its negatives. So I think you can downplay yourself so much that people don't actually know what you've done or what you did, etc. So there's a balance to be had, like with everything. But you're right. I think when you have individuals who are overemphasizing certain things, it's because they don't want to cover or address other points.
Right.
I think we're in a world now, and if we talk about this thing called leadership, my view of leadership is leadership in business is not like leadership in the military. Leadership in the military is stand up and lead by example, but there also is a very strong moral and ethical aspect to it, about honesty, integrity, and walking the walk and talking the talk. It's very, very fundamental, and it's something that's sacrosanct in many ways. But in leadership in the corporate world now, I think leadership now is about having that awareness and understanding that the world we're in is different, that the younger folk coming in now have different expectations and different levels of tolerance.
Right.
So willing to put up with than they were, say previously. And and social issues, political issues, and environmental issues are now all blurring. I was on a call with the women's group in my previous employer, and the analysis was raised because there was a very, very disturbing murder of a young lady who actually came from not far from here. Terrible. Abducted off the street by a policeman of all people. And it created a lot of media anxiety, but it also created it uncorked all the issues women have with walking home at night and women's safety. And then there was so I held a session with a lot of women at various ages and stages, and the statistic was brought forward: 98% of women have had some form of hostile, derogatory, experience. 98%. Another 2% probably haven't answered. It's a damning indictment. So my point was, no one organisation can deal with that, but what we can do is do a little bit differently.
Yeah.
In the way that we can influence. I can't change society, can't change anything else, but in the little world we occupy, we can do something a bit differently to try and just reset slightly. So when you hear statistics like that, when you look at that, you then understand behaviours,
right?
Understand why people are the way they are, and then because that impacts into your work, because your work life and you as an individual don't demarcate. So I think there's much more awareness and much more of a need to inculcate them into the environment. And over and above all this, you still have to be effective and perform your role and your job, and do the best by your client or do the best by your organisation.
Yeah,
I still have a very, very simple philosophy, and that is: if you take the paycheck from your organisation, if you take the paycheck, do the best that you can. And if you're not willing to, don't take it.
Right. Yeah. And I think, doing the best you can now is now expanding, or probably should have always expanded, to treating people well, right? I mean, that's kind of what you're, something very integral to what you were saying is that we have to have the assumption, which is true, that people are intrinsically valuable, right? That it's not because of what they can do for you, but intrinsically because, well,
I'm a Christian. I believe that everyone is made in the image of God. So intrinsically, if we believe that something has value, then we're going to treat them valuably, right? So I really, really enjoy this point. We're coming to the top of the hour. I'd love to have you back. I have an idea about what I have you back for, probably related to the idea of trust and loyalty, integrity. But you'll have to stay tuned to that. But, keep your calendar open, I would say.
I would be honored, but I also don't want to leave your audience with the impression that I'm some sort of Mother Teresa or some sort of benevolent character. Well,
I can air some of your dirty laundry. I mean, if that's what you want to do, I don't mind. I mean, I think we worked together for about 4 or 5 months, right? So yeah. Now, I've seen you at the pub, and you carry forth the reputation of the English and the European pub life. But I mean, no, I don't think anybody listening or watching are going to take away from that, right? I think the key point is that we all know that life in general is very tough, and business life is very difficult, and a lot of struggles. And in the midst of that is what you're saying, which is, I think, a very real needed message to be said, right? So,
yeah. Operating in a commercial environment for an organization which has commercial priorities, and you still have to make sure that you're meeting the commercial objectives of the organization. I just think we have to meet these objectives in the right way. It's not mutually exclusive, but incompatible. You can do both.
Absolutely, yeah. And maybe when we come back next time, we'll talk about how that drives productivity too, right? All that makes, we all talk about employee satisfaction. So, all right, I'm going to shift gears very quickly into something a little lighter. I have some rapid fire questions for you. Quite simply, you don't know what I'm going to ask. It hasn't been scripted, right? So my first question to you, I mean, if you've watched previous interviews, you might see some of them, but what is your alter ego profession? If you weren't doing what you were doing now, what would you want to do?
I'd be an artist or a designer of men's fashion.
Really?
Yeah, I studied art and design and men's fashion at St Martin's College in London.
Okay.
I took a year out from one of our firms to do that. So I'm actually quite good at drawing and painting and still life. I'm quite accomplished at that. If I show you some of my work, you might be quite surprised.
You didn't show it to me when I was working with you, but that's awesome. That's great.
I'll find some somewhere.
Okay. What book title or movie title would best describe your career?
Book title or movie title? The Accidental Tourist.
Okay. Tourist to Canada? Tourist anywhere? Calgary? Yeah, it's. I've actually never seen that movie. It's a bit of blasphemy, but I've heard it's very good. But okay, all right, good. And then finally, a COVID habit or hobby that you developed.
A habit I developed was spending time on video calls, talking to people about themselves and how they're doing, rather than just getting straight into work. That was something we did a lot of. Spent first 5 or 10 minutes, never mind the work. Just tell me how you're doing. Is everything okay? Are you finding the routine overwhelming?
Mm-hmm.
Because not much we could do to help, but sometimes just sharing it. So that was a habit we got into, was just talking as people, rather than just getting into the issues, right? Where are we in the program? What have we done? What's outstanding? What have you done? It's just, are you okay? Are you going crazy? Because I'm going crazy too. That was probably the best habit, was just spending some time just checking in on people to see how they are. Mental health has been a big challenge for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
As you well know.
Yeah, for sure. Any hobbies? Fun stuff?
Oh, I've been dragged into helping the 5-year-old to 7-year-olds on a Sunday play. If I was back in Toronto, it'd be baseball, but here it's cricket. and it's entertaining. The kids are very cute, and the last few weekends we've had 40 of them.
Wow.
45 to 70-year-olds listening to me. Who'd have ever thought that would happen? So that's been
Wow.
quite, and they're unfiltered. So they tell you everything about what their parents do, how they do it, what they say to each other. I know more about their parents than I ever wish to do, which makes me think that probably our school teachers know the same about us.
It's true. Yeah, it's very, very true. It's and I often wonder kind of what the teachers think of us, right? Yeah, my wife's a high school teacher. And teenagers are a little bit more guarded in what they say, but even then, so every so often, it's like, okay, well, it's interesting. So, but anyway, David, thanks so much for joining me today. Really, really appreciate it. I'm going to have a fun time stamping this, because whenever I release the post release, it's always time stamped, right, for when we talked about certain things. But we really covered a lot of ground. It's very, very insightful, introspective. So, and I think a lot of things that I'll take into my coaching as well going forward. But I'm going to let you go for now, but we'll touch base again really soon. So keep your calendar open. And don't go away. I'm just going to put you in backstage right now, okay? Thanks for coming again.
My pleasure.
Wow, what a conversation that was. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. I hope you watched the rebroadcast. I'm going to try to make it a little bit fancier at the beginning so you last throughout the hour. But if you start watching it, I think it's pretty addictive listening to David speak. Part of it may be his accent. It's always a British accent over in North America. It gives him a little bit more authority for some reason. It's unfair, I think, but in any case, that was a great conversation, and I do hope that you took away some things about a career journey that if you can apply it to yourself, you can apply it to the life of your coworkers or your family members. That's the whole purpose of the series. All right. So have a good weekend, guys, and stay safe. And until next week, take care. Bye.